3 o'clock.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we can see, you are eager to continue with the conference. The program is dynamic this afternoon, so we better get started. I just want to remind you that you may type the questions in the chat panel of the Zoom. And for the presenters, please stay in the allotted time, that is 15 minutes. We can start now with our second session, volume and capacities of pots and quantitative data as the indicator of function and use. The first speaker is Mansa Vinatsa, and Mansa will present her work calculating vessel's capacity to understand pot's function. Mansa, can you join us with audio and video, please?
Yes, hello.
Please, you may start sharing and start the presentation.
Hello to everyone. Hope you had all pleasant meal, and now we can proceed with our afternoon session. I would really like to thank the organizers for inviting me on such an interesting conference. So, when Archimedes discovered the principle of buoyancy, he ran through Syracuse exclaiming, "Eureka!" The same can be imagined when an archaeologist finds that he can easily calculate the volume of vessels in an AutoCAD environment. Today, digital tools allow us to quickly and easily calculate the volume of vessels. The advantages and disadvantages compared to the older or classical methods will not be discussed here, as quite a bit of ink has already been spilled on this topic. I have used AutoCAD. Other programs are also suitable, like Rhino, Blender, etc. All we have to do is to draw the vessel. Then we vectorize only its inner profile and rotate it around its axis. This gives us a 3D model whose volume is calculated with one command. Such a quick way of calculating the volume of vessels allowed us to begin with our study, but first some theoretical background. In the study of the function of vessels, their volume plays an important role. It allows us to ask questions about the production, distribution, and consumption of past societies as a result of their economic organization. Of course, the volume of the vessels is only one of the segments in a long chain of investigation of the function of ceramic vessels. This, in turn, may be explored directly or indirectly. In indirect observation, we observe the morphological and technological characteristics of the vessels, like surface treatment techniques, thickness of vessel walls, forming techniques, fabrics, always based on a chaîne opératoire approach, of course. In direct observation, we observe macroscopic and microscopic residues. This set also includes experimental archaeology, for example, resistance to mechanical stress, reaction of vessels to the heat, etc., and of course, ethnological comparisons. Only by considering all these segments, we can approach the final function of the vessel. Many authors have already dealt with this subject. Main approaches can be presented on a timeline. Marian Smith produced first methodological study based on statistical calculations in which she linked function, shape, and size of vessels. Elizabeth Hendrickson and Mary MacDonald combined form and function based on ethnological material and applied the findings to archaeological material. Skibo and Schiffer contribute enormously on experimental archaeology area and pointed out the distinction between actual and intentional use of vessels. Kirsten Yull upgraded on Smith. Her analysis was based on whole vessels from which she did statistical processing of data and combined results with archaeobotanical research and consideration of archaeological context. Different authors have observed different morphological and technological characteristics of the vessels. The result is a series of so-called functional types. We were more convinced by Eula's model as she took so-called leading factors, morphological parameters, and functional categories forms into account. Her final model has 5 main groups. First group, storage vessels and water transport vessels. Then second group, multifunctional vessels. Third group is cooking vessels. Fourth group represents food processing vessels, serving vessels, and individual eating and drinking vessels. And fifth group are vessels with other function. We believe that the vessels were designed for the purpose of use. In shaping the vessel, the potter made certain technical choices intended to influence the appearance and function of the vessel, whether it was technical, ideological, or emotional in nature. On this basis, we have started our own study. We wanted to see if there is any pot's volume changing from bronze to early Iron Age in our area. We analyzed vessels from the wider Caput Adria area from 14 settlement sites. First, we choose Hilfort Moncodonia in Istria, which belongs to the early and middle Bronze Age. The pottery from this site was fully published in 2017 by Anja Helmut Kramberger. Technologically, the ceramic is quite uniform. A total of 7,420 parts of vessels were found at the site, of which there are 236 reconstructions of whole vessels. Moncodonia represents the place with the highest proportion of whole vessels in the period mentioned and in the area under study. Therefore, it is suitable for this type of study. During our work, we were observing the type, the volume, the height, the diameter of the opening, the surface treatment, and the presence of the additional parts of the vessels, and of course, fabrics. Based on this, we determined 9 groups. First group represents vessels which have barbotine or some other slip or are burnished on inner side. All these techniques were used for ensuring impermeability or for better handling. Also, they can have additional elements as handles, locks, or some applique. We understand them as pots for serving food, eating vessels, drinking vessels, and vessels with other function due to Eula's model. Vessels from second and third group are most diverse. We are talking about pots, baking trays, lids, vessels, bowls, cups, and jars. Pots have handles and locks. Their surface is predominantly polished or with some barbotine on outer surface. Cups have well-finished surface as burnishing, polishing, or slip were used. We understand these vessels as serving vessels, eating vessels, and drinking vessels. Pots from this group were probably used also for short-term storing. Pots in third group have additional elements as handles, locks, and applique. They help not only for better handling, but also for closing vessels opening. As a rule, there is a barbotine on outer surface. This vessel group functions were probably cooking, short-term storing, food processing, serving, and eating. From fourth group on, the vessels are not so diverse anymore. We are talking about pots, bowls, jars, and lids. Pots have barbotine on outer surface. The bowls are polished on both sides. These vessel group functions were cooking, short-term storing, food processing, serving, and eating. Vessels from a fifth group are almost the same in types as from the fourth one. Lids are decorated on upper part. Mostly they are interpreted as bowls, but due to the complex decorations, they were most likely used as lids. Pots have barbotine and are burnished. Bowls are also burnished. This vessel group functions were cooking and liquid storing. In group number 6, there is a barbotine on outer surface of the pots. Bowls are burnished. They were probably meant for long-term storing and food processing. Pots from 7th group have additional elements for better handling. The bottle-like vessel appears for the first time in and they were meant for food and liquid storing. In group number 8 and 9, we only meet one type of vessels, pots. They have additional elements and barbotin on outer surface. Also, the inclusions in fabrics are only medium and coarse size. They were both from 8 and 9 group meant for food storing. According to the morphological characteristics of the individual forms within these groups, we find that vessels over 10 liters were not used for cooking. This is evidenced by their volume, additional elements, and surface treatment techniques. Most of the vessels belong from first to third group in 37.8%. We can assume that vessels with a volume between 1 to 3 liters were used for cooking. It is important to stress out that 174 vessels belong to the first three volume groups. Given the quantity of whole vessels, we have tried to find out whether grouping by volume is possible in the sense of the ancient volume system, but we have not detected any clear regularities. Perhaps this could be envisaged for vessels with a capacity of 11, 21, or 49 liters, but the sample is still too small for this statement. The reason for the latter also lies in the potter who specified the shape or designed the vessel according to a model. With this result, by putting all vessels in these groups, we believe that we can use Moncodonia's case for starting point in vessels function in early and middle Bronze Age in area under the study. Our next question was, can we compare this group system on later pottery in late Bronze and early Iron Age? And is there any change in vessels volumes? We analyzed 16 additional sites from Capo Tadri area. Unfortunately, with one exception, Mosna Sochi, not enough whole vessels have been preserved from single size. We are talking about 45 vessels from 15 sites. Statistically, not enough, as we do not have reconstructions of whole vessels that would allow us to conduct such a study with enough data to be statistically relevant. The only exception is early Iron Age settlement of Mosna Sochi. From here, we have 45 whole vessels available, which we analyze in the same way as those from Oncodonia. The most numerous are those vessels that belong to the second and third group. Within the third group, there are as many as 18 pots. Most of them were found in houses, not in workshops, many of which have a textured surface, and the fabric itself has a very high quantity calcium carbonate temper. With combination of pots location, perhaps we can observe in this group a form that serves for cooking and as such did not change much over time in a volume system way of thinking, of course. The topic presented is certainly interesting and adds considerably to the research of the functionality of vessels. At the same time, we have to take into account certain obstacles. We emphasize that there is a high percentage of smaller whole vessels because it is easier to reconstruct the whole shape. The surface treatment techniques can only be determined in cases where the surface has been preserved, which varies from site to site. Then such a study can only be conducted if statistically sufficient data is available. Finally, we can approach their former function only by consideration of direct or indirect observations. We believe we can get over this long list of obstacles only if a proper methodological approach is used. In our study, we observed various features of vessels in a desire to understand their function. So not only the morphology, but also the context of the archaeological finds suggests their use. Of course, the road to get closer to the final answer is still long. Archaeometric studies, lipid analysis, archaeobotanical analysis, etc., have big potential here. Just once again, we have reiterated the role of sampling in archaeological research itself. At archaeological excavations, one must always consider what can be drawn from the archaeological context. Therefore, various soil samples, both from the vessel themselves and from the surroundings, are never superfluous.
Thank you, Mansa. An interesting view on division of vessels according to capacity. Does anyone have a question on the topic? Can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay. Any questions, please? No? Dushka or Mkotsua, I didn't understand how are cooking pots identified on the base of volume. Mansa.
Yes, thank you for the question. We didn't consider only the volume, but we were observing also the surface treatment and additional elements and etc. I may add that the study was based on published on a publication, and I did it in a sense that what can I do when I will work on my own material. This was the main purpose. What should take to account and so on.
Thank you, Mansa. Any more questions? All right, we move forward. According to the program, the next speaker is Andras Füzeshi. Andras apologized for the bad connection and maybe he will not be able to participate in the discussion. Due to the potential problem, he sent us his presentation, Capacity as Quantifiable Data of the Household Activity, Neolithic Case Studies from the Great Hungarian Plain. Jasna, please. Sorry. Sorry, Dushka. Mansa, Dushka has another question. Did you see any use of fire on them? I mean, on cooking pots?
As I mentioned, I got this data from the publication. I didn't work on the material itself. So I only got the informations that were published in catalog.
Okay. It's clear now. Thank you. Then we move to the Andras Füzeshi presentations. Jasna, would you be so kind? Mansa, can you?
Okay.
Analysis gradually leveled off. Visuality has always been and remains dominant in the archaeological inquiry. But thanks to advances in Dear colleagues, archaeology has come a long way from the treasure hunts and aesthetic preferences of the beginnings, during which the qualitative and quantitative analysis gradually leveled off. Visuality has always been and remains dominant in the archaeological inquiry. But thanks to advances in information technology and computing, quantitative research is gaining ground in recent decades. Ceramic vessels constitute a defining part of material culture in archaeological periods, not only in quality but also in quantity. Quantification, as with all archaeological finds, is difficult due to taphonomic losses, primarily fragmentation. While archaeologists with scientific background have developed reliable methods to overcome taphonomic issues, ceramic specialists lag behind in this respect. However, the introduction of a protocol similar to the number of identified specimens or the minimum number of individuals would be expedient in ceramic studies as well. For the study of ceramics, for example household vessel sets, qualitative and quantitative ceramics data should be linked together in a single interpretive frame. In these studies, we are facing another problem. Different vessel types were becoming worn at different times. Thus, the excavated archaeological material usually is a time-averaged assemblage. Ethnographic parallels can only provide a point of reference in this process. Despite all these difficulties, quantitative analyses, even basic ones, are still worth to conduct. For example, the number of fragments and total weight can be highly functional data. In the trench section excavated in Öcsöt-Kovásalom in the summer of 2020, we collected the find of material at 20 centimeter levels per square meter, from frequency and weight to depositional phases and the direction of a large-scale landscaping event were reconstructed. In addition to this data, capacity can be another measurement after the definition and delineation of its possible use in our research. Although the method has been available for quite some time, perhaps due to the relative complexity of its formula, it has not become popular in practice, similar to several other ideas in the manuals of the 70s and 80s. The data presented were calculated by two methods. We developed the first method with Katalin Sebők. By simplifying the formula of the solids of revolution, the capacity can be calculated from two measurements, height and the half of the vessel's cross-section as area. The second method was devised by Thomas and Wheeler from Ashmolean Museum. The data required for this method are height and diameter or radius measured at equal distances. The Excel spreadsheet available on the internet calculates automatically based on these. Before turning to case studies, we need to clarify our interpretive framework. The interpretation of the output data is influenced by at least two factors and their associated phenomena. One is the vessel inventory, since the capacity measurement of a single vessel is unassuming compared to an entire set that translates into much more informative data. One of the defining aspects of the vessel inventories is to whom, or more precisely, to which community it belongs. It's used by a single person, a household, or another intrasite group, or the entire community. Vessel sets placed in graves, which is extremely uncommon in the Neolithic, are considered exceptions with a clear association between the pots and the deceased. All other cases are problematic. The other factor is the household. As a basic social unit in prehistory, it was involved in different tasks, including accumulation, preservation, reproduction, and transmission of material and intangible values. Household as an analytical unit in archaeological research is more problematic, partly due to the projection of the listed tasks into material culture. Their relation is revealed only in a few fortunate instances, in burnt house remains, intentionally structured deposits, and other special find assemblages, such as the furnished house models of Kukuty and Tripolia culture. The household is not only a static structural unit, but also a dynamic aggregation of activities and practices. For a significant part of these activities, ceramics were used during the Neolithic. Thus, the functional examination of the pottery spectrum can substantially complement the research on households. My presentation evaluates composition and change in Neolithic ceramic vessel inventories based on 5 assemblages from different regions of the Great Hungarian Plan. The first is a burnt house from the early Neolithic site of Szajor-Felsőföld. The The second is a two-story building from the late Neolithic tell of Berettyűfalu Herpai. The third is a special deposition of a late Neolithic well excavated in the horizontal settlement of Polgárcsőszalom. The remaining two examples are vessel assemblages from the Mezőköves-Mocsonyás and the Öcsöd-Kovács-halom sites, dated to the main transitional periods of the early, middle and late Neolithic. The early Neolithic building at the Szajor-Felsőföld site was being excavated by Páraczky in the late 1970s. Thanks to the documentation by square meter, a detailed reconstruction could be made based on the finds in and under the house debris, such as the skeleton of an individual buried in the house. 27 vessels came to light from the building and an exceedingly large container next to it. Mezőköves-Mocsonyás, excavated by Nándor Kalisz and Judit Kós, is one of the best-known sites of the early Alföld linear pottery culture. In the middle of the large excavation surface, the rubble of 5 adjacent houses was found. A large number of ceramic shards found there represents the formative initial period of the ALPC. Data from 175 restored vessels are included in the analysis. The Öcsöd-Kovács-halom site represents the transitional period of the Middle and Late Neolithic. The excavations carried out by Páraczky and his colleagues in the 1980s focused on the central multi-layered part of the large settlement. Based on the burnt houses of two settlement levels, the changes in the settlement structure over time could be explained. Studies of the ceramic fragments revealed that a significant part of the finds had relocated in the backfill during a reorganization of the settlement. Thus, the shards cannot be associated to any household, but the entire excavated section of the settlement. The analysis includes data from 223 reconstructed vessels. Next to the late Neolithic tell of Polgárcsőszalom, the 63-hectare single-layer settlement stretches, which was excavated in 3 hectares during the 1990s. Settlement units consisting of buildings, outbuildings, wells, and pits with various functions, as well as graves, form the basis of the settlement structure. Wells, found in almost the same number as the buildings, support the importance of water management. One such feature stood out, in which more than 100 vessels were head-placed. 89 restored vessels of this structured deposit are included in the analysis. At the turn of the 1970s and 1980s, Nándor Kalisz, Márta Máté and Páraczky excavated more than a dozen burnt houses with abandoned finds in Berettyűfalu Herpai, the eponymous tell site of the Herpai culture. Thanks to the detailed documentation, the finds of house level could be accurately located, thus the building has been reconstructed several times, most recently 2 years ago. Several of the 84 pots were located on the floor, most of them on shelves set up next to the wall. This analysis includes capacity data for 73 vessels, excluding lids. During the evaluation, I supplemented the capacity data with vessel types. Based on my previous research, I found that in addition to the proportions of diameter and height, delineation of the profile is what determines vessel type. Dimensions are already included in capacity calculations. Therefore, in this analysis, I compared the profile type with vessel capacity. I minimized typological variability. The 6 to 9 variations per site include simple and complex forms ranging from open to closed. All fine assemblages contain general shapes, mostly simple geometric forms, and culture-specific types as well. The latter usually display characteristic decoration styles, which also emphasize their representational value. The first dataset on the left shows the distribution of these vessel categories within the studied inventories. The histograms on the right show the capacity distribution. In addition to the summarized dataset, the breakdown by vessel type is highly informative. Based on these two sets, I created size categories that could represent a specific part of the given vessel set, not only by capacity, but also by the types of vessels included. For each site, I will now focus only the most important features. The free-room building in Herby provided 3 times as many pots were found as in Seoul, distributed approximately equally between the rooms. However, the larger quantity resulted in a more blurred image, especially in the smaller size ranges. At both sides, the large amount of complex shapes that usually occurred in the smaller size ranges is striking. In the assemblages representing the ceramic material of an entire site, a more homogeneous picture emerges due to the higher number of cases and the compensation of the smaller differences between the households. Without the addition of qualitative data, the histograms are unimodal and skewed to the left, and no categories could be created based on them. In Mezőkövesd, despite the relatively large sample, the complete lack of larger size ranges is striking, which is presumably a taphonomical phenomenon. However, several transitional categories could be distinguished among the smaller ones. The relatively low number of culture-specific vessel types is striking in both assemblages, which can be explained by the temporary nature of those assemblages and the formation of a new cultural sphere. The find assemblage from the Polgar well is an exception due to the purposeful nature of the structured deposition, resulting in distinct vessel types and capacity distribution. Small vessels also represent a relatively narrow type spectrum, which is well illustrated by a comparison of the ceramic inventory of the well and the settlement. The disproportion between them is consistent with the structured placement of the artifacts in the well. The comparative analysis of these assemblages provides an opportunity to detect temporal changes in household activities. By condensing the basic data of the finds into an ordered figure, the main trends become visible. First, on the results of the taphonomic modifications. The assemblages recovered in their primary position, Seoul and Herby, represent the full-size spectrum, while the finds from secondary position, especially Mezőkövesd, lack large size categories. At the same time, the later inventories provide better insight into the smaller size range due to the larger number of cases. The boundaries of size categories determined side by side don't coincide on the metric scale, especially in the range of 5 to 10 liters. Despite local differences, certain basic categories can be outlined. By supplementing the size ranges with data on the function and service life of the vessels, we can distinguish 3 large groups for the inventories without the exceptional category of miniature vessels, which is omitted from the study. The composition of personal, nuclear, and communal inventories shows not only an increase in volume, but also a change in the function and use of the vessels. The culture-specific vessel types highlighted in the slide appear as part of personal and nuclear inventories, with a few well-defined exceptions. The personal group can only be deduced from the analyzed assemblages, especially from Mezőkövesd and Öcsöd. The Seoul house is a typical case of a nuclear inventory, and the Herby building represents a transition between nuclear and communal sets. In addition to house burning combined with feasting, this is also indicated by the fact that in contrast to the case of Seoul, the vessels over 25 liters are much more differentiated. The special objects of the communal inventory are extremely large storage vessels. A functionally special case of this category is represented by the pole guide inventory containing water-carrying vessels. I believe that the analysis of this small sample succeeded in proving that the capacity can be a valuable source, the inclusion of which in ceramic analysis can broaden our interpretation possibilities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Andras. Thank you, Andras. If I may say, fascinating assemblages you're working on. You are with us, I believe, still. Connection is good enough, I believe. So there is any questions? Is there any questions for Andras's presentations? Oh, Jasna says, thanks. Thank you, Andras. We continue with Zsófia Másek and the presentation Food Storage Habits on the Late Sarmatian Period in the Hungarian Plain. Zsófia, please join us with audio and video.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, everything is very well. You may continue.
Okay. So thank you for being here, even if virtually. So we stick to the region, but we move forward a bit in time. So I would speak about the late Sarmatian period of the Great Hungarian Plain. In the Roman period, a new population of Eastern origin lived eastwards from the Danube in the Carpathian Basin. The Sarmatians settled in the territory of the Hungarian Plain in the early 1st century AD. Their rule was overthrown in the late 4th, early 5th century by the Great Migration of Peoples and by the Hunnic Empire of Attila. Hungarian research tends to accept that the existence of Sarmatian cultural groups continued through the Hunnic period. The people living here adapted to the new nomadic empire and provided most likely the economic background of the empire in its central areas. Therefore, the last horizon of the Roman period of East Hungary is likely called the late Sarmatian Han period. The Sarmatians of this region were a settled population from the middle of the 2nd century at the latest. A great number of large settlements are excavated, used sometimes between the 2nd and 5th centuries continuously. I'm showing you here just 2 examples of different settlement structures. In these settlements, the products of their own irrespective pottery production are to be found, which combines Romanized, Latin, and Eastern traditions. Pottery is also common in the graves, but most generally only one small specimen appears in the graves, small pots and bowls, beakers, and cups. Settlements specialized for pottery production, also known, like on the right, which produced thousands of coarse pottery, mostly pots, that one. The settlement shows that in the foreground of Aquincum in Pannonia, an industry of Romanized influence came into existence, which supplied the interior of the Sarmatian Barbaricum with ceramics. Sarmatian period settlement material in the Hungarian plain consists of great amount of untempered, wheel-thrown fine ceramics. The remaining material includes hand-formed pottery, and in the late Roman period, barbarian wheel-thrown coarsewares also were used. Smoothed-in decorations on the fine ceramics are well known since the 2nd century. Now I would like to turn to a site which has been in the focus of my researches for quite a few years back. Its name is Rákóczi-falva, and it lies in the central Tisza region, direct on the eastern bank of the Tisza River. The material of this multi-period settlement was my main topic at the university after I participated in the excavations as a student, and it was the later topic of my PhD thesis. The amount of the analyzed ceramic fragments from the 4th to 6th centuries reaches up to almost 19,000 pottery fragments. 4 ceramic horizons were separated. The first horizon includes the material of the local late Sarmatian Hunnic period. The second horizon is a transition horizon between the Sarmatian and Gepidic period settlements, In this period, the second, we may assume arrival of new communities settled nearby an old habitation. The third horizon represents the settlement material classical for the Tisa region in the early Merovingian Japidic period, and horizon 4 is another transitional horizon between the Japidic and early Avar age. Here I would like to talk about the first horizon, but I would like to emphasize that an importance of the site lies also in its continuous use, which may help us to better understand the Han period and the early medieval transformation processes. So the largest settlement unit of the first horizon is an intensively used settlement part with a dense and clear structure, as you can see on the left. The two most common feature types are storage pits and sunken floor dwellings, which densify on the west side. In the assessment of the pottery and the settlement structure, special significance had the so-called refitting method, the analysis of the complementary fragments of particular vessels collected from different stratigraphical units. I'm showing one more detailed picture. Altogether, 140 such connections, refits, were found, most of them in this settlement part. The example in the right corner demonstrates that these are not part of analogical vessels, but they are physically joined together. It is clear that the pottery densifies in the center of the settlement. In this core, almost every feature belongs to this activity area connected by the refits, which means that these pits were opened at the same time and filled in more or less in the same time. This activity marks the end of this settlement. 8 individuals were thrown or laid down here into former storage pits. The pottery from the trash material thrown on one of these skeletal remains could be directly connected by refitting to the center of this activity area. Based on this picture, the closure of the settlement can be interpreted as a violent destruction. The trash material of the pottery, the burned dog of the buildings, including some human remains, was leveled into the settlement features, most of all into former storage pits. I would return at the end to spatial analysis, but now let's see the material in question. Storage vessels make up the most common form type of wheel-thrown pottery, mostly of reduced firing, and in the same time, the second most common main functional type of the first horizon after the cooking pots. It means that they represent 35% of the material, almost 400 fragments, 4,000, I'm sorry. 4 main types were identified. I would like to draw attention to the first with a narrow mouth, and the third with a wide mouth and shoulder, because these are the two clearest, most basic forms. I had almost 2,000 completed vessels from this site. 200, I'm sorry again. Therefore, I turned to calculations of capacity. I used the so-called sum cylinders method. I didn't know that Andras would spoke about that, but he did, I'm glad, so we used the same methodology. The capacity of the completed storage vessels were between 8 and 49 liters. In the next step, I would like to see the correlations between capacity and dimensions. The most significant data we have are the diameters of the mouth, so I tried to connect these two data sets. The result was, as you can see, that the storage vessels have most commonly amount of 17 and between 17 and 22 centimeters. There is no strong correlation with the capacity. The largest completed storage vessel had, for example, a diameter of 18 centimeters. However, the third form type appears in a group on the chart on the right side because of also from former reasons. These vessels could have had another function as the high and narrow ones. Based on anthropological data, storage vessels with a narrow orifice were shaped mostly for pouring grain or liquids, while the ones with a wide mouth were more suitable for immerse from them. In both cases, these dimensions do not allow frequent displacements if the vessels were filled. As an outtake, I would like to show you that this attempt was not a failure because it could be useful for other pottery types. I examined also the correlations of capacity and diameters of the pots. As you can see, we have a strong correlation here. It can be stated that the most frequent capacity of pots could have been between 2.5, 5.5 liters. From this data, it seems that the size of the households, I mean the people who regularly ate together, could have been quite large. I examined also the relationship of capacity and ornamentation. The storage vessels were decorated most generally with smooth-in decorations on the shoulders. In the late Sarmatian period, the decorated fine ceramics could have been used for storing dry substances and liquids, for preparing food without a fire, for serving and dining, preparing and stirring liquids, for their serving and consuming, and also for short-distance transportation. Research showed that decoration and style could be treated as tool of communication. The decorated vessels had most likely a high visibility in the households. These form times show the prominent role of husbandry and agricultural products as their communal consumption in these communities. In the 5th century, the volume of the vessels is significantly reduced in the 2nd and 3rd horizons. They show transforming economic backgrounds and changing social dimensions. Practices related to storage traditions, food and drink processing, and consumption have also changed. But now I would like to turn to the next question of the 1st horizon, and it is, where did these storage vessels stand in a household? On the basis of their shapes, a position sunk into the ground could also be imagined like in the Roman provinces. However, there are no archaeological traces for this on the settlements at all. The picture on the left shows the proportion of the pottery material in the features alongside the scatter pattern of the refittings. At the beginning, I assumed that most of the distracted and redeposited settlement material could have been originated from the sunken floor buildings of the settlement, but this could not be justified. Every feature I plotted, pottery, skeletal remains, burnt daub or thick burnt layers, densified in the middle and southeastern part of the settlement unit. I assumed that by the redeposition of the waste material, the closest open features were used as landfills. Therefore, I have previously encountered the theory that in the middle of the settlement, in the empty places, may be surface building stud, which left no archaeological traces at all. The questions about the place of the household pottery have never been discussed in detail in this research area. In the following, I would like to play a bit with the features of this very site. So first, what if these storage vessels stood in the sunken floor buildings? I made 2 schematic reconstructions, only with some place for sleeping, and filled the remaining space with storage vessels. This arrangement is possible, but I think not very likely. Of course, you would need much more space for the whole pottery material, but it's hard to model because some smaller vessel types could also hang on the walls or placed in each other. We should not forget of other household items made from organic materials. However, storage vessels could only stand in the floor. So I think we can rule this out. And the second deeply discussed research question is the relationship of the vessels and the storage pits. In the Hungarian plains, some deposits with intact pottery were found since the late 19th century. Therefore, some researchers thought that the pits were served as a regular place for the storage vessels. But there are many points against this. First, this new find on the left is an example which shows that intact storage vessels could be rather parts of deposits, probably ritual deposits in this culture group. Secondly, in other time periods, we simply assume that the grain was stored in these types of pits without the use of ceramic vessels. Third, the ornamentation and the careful surface treatment of these vessels speak against that they were always buried in the pits. And 4, they simply do not fit there, as you can see, I hope, and you think so too, in the right side, that the pit shapes do not match for this function, and the pits of this site are in many cases too deep. These are the largest vessel which I placed into some of these pits from the same site. So I think that we can rule this out too. In the last slide, you can see the scatter pattern of the storage vessels on the settlement with turkeys. We can see that they densify also in the central and southeastern part of the settlement. Their number is smaller nearby the sunken floor buildings on the west side. So I think that this map confirms also the previous results about the existence of surface buildings. And to the discussion, in the settlement, a redeposition of the settlement material could be demonstrated. Therefore, there is no chance for separation of individual household materials. In spite of this, it is worth to work with spatial analysis. Moreover, I think that spatial analysis and functional analysis of pottery should go hand in hand for a better understanding of the sites. Pottery needs space and regularly used places in the household. The Sarmatian storage vessels could have stood at least partially in surface buildings. Based on ethnological research, if a sunken storage pit was opened, its material needed to be used up fully. In other cases, the stored material would be exposed to the air, to pests and rodents. So I think that a possibility is likely that some of the grain ended up after this pit reopened in the houses and in the storage vessels. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Zsofia. Great presentation, very detailed analysis, and obviously many questions arose from it.
Really?
Do we have any questions for Zsofia? Please stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, I'm trying.
All right. In the meantime,
It's in red. Stop sharing.
yes.
Okay, sorry.
So any questions for Zsofia? Any comments? No. So thank you, Zsofia, again. We close this. Yes, Dushka, sorry. How was storage pits used then? Dushka Urem asked.
Thank you for the question. So I think they were mainly used for storing grain and cereals and other types of material, but only so they filled in directly the pits, and they did not had to use vessels in the pits for that.
All right. Any more questions? Thank you. Platon Petridis, don't you think the bottom of this vase is very narrow to stand alone?
Yeah, that's a great question, and yeah, I think so that they are quite so not well balanced, but if they are empty, but if they were filled, then they had better balance. And yeah, it's a bit odd, but I don't see any other possibility.
All right, Dushka, is there any evidence of filling pits to preserve grains?
Lining?
Yes. Coating.
Yeah. Well, not lining, but burning on the inside and plastering. So some type of clearing, but no organic materials in it.
Thank you, Zsofia. Is it all? Obviously, yes. We close this session with Rumjana Koleva and her presentation, Figure Out Pottery Usage. Rumjana, please join us with your video and audio, and yes, thank you. You may start the presentation, please. Can you hear me, Rumjana? We can't hear you.
Czekaj. A mora da se unmute?
No, I was muted still. So now,
Now we can.
I'm sorry. So you hear me now? I can start?
Yes, you can start.
Okay. I'm sorry for this. The settlement near Zlatna Livada has been studied within the scope of a rescue excavation in connection with the construction of the Maritsa Highway. Significant part of it lay outside. Wow. And outside the easement of the highway and remained unstudied. The ceramic material is documented according to the structures in which it was found. The positive thing in this case is the most of them are dugouts. The inhabitants of the settlement apparently deposited the broken vessels near the inhabited areas, from where they fell back into the same abundant negative structures and mixed with other material that the filler contained. We can consider the recovered ceramic shapes as remnants of primary, very few cases, or secondary refuse, the majority. The function of vessels is usually determined according to their shape. Can the capacity add information, especially when the shape is similar? Jars are the most common shape and comprise nearly half of the ceramic remains of the settlement. It is within this type of vessels that the largest differences in capacity are observed. If we arrange them according to the characteristic, we still will notice that they can be divided into several groups. The capacity of less than 350 milliliters is normal for a cup, not a jar. So it is right to move all 9 of these pieces to the category of cups. The same is done with bowls of similar small capacity. Looking at the rest jars, the following can be distinguished. Jars over 450 milliliters to 1000 milliliters stand between cups and small pots. They can be used both as cups and as small pots for various food products that are not used in large quantities. For convenience, here we'll name them very small jars, as so far no vessel whose shape resembles cups has a corresponding capacity. The next group are jars with a capacity of between 1000 and 1800 milliliters, defined as small jars. Their function is suitable for the short-term preservation of surplus of milk, preparation of yogurt, storing butter, or other products. The division between this and the previous group is not very clear, and they could be combined into a common one. Given the modern cooking sets, which include a container with a capacity of 1000 to 1500 milliliters, we prefer to separate the pots with a capacity between 1000 and 1800 milliliters as suitable for storing products needed in small quantities or leftovers after using the main part. Medium jars have a capacity between 1800 and 3500 milliliters. They are most numerous, and as shown from the Brzezno experiment and the modern cooking sets, such jars are best suited for preparing meals in quantities needed for a family of 4 or 5. Large jars have a capacity between 4000 and 7000 milliliters that can be used both for cooking in large quantities, that is less probable, and for storing products or water. Storage jars have a capacity over 8,000 milliliters. The structures in which the pots were found can be divided into two main groups: living or household premises and storage facilities. Most of the very small and medium jars are found in living or household premises, while large and storage jars are predominantly found in storage facilities. Regardless of the way they got into the complexes, noticeable is that only within the two groups, large jars and storage jars, the majority is found in structures defined as storage facilities. But small and medium jars and jugs were also used as storage containers, like those found in the basement of a dwelling, where pots of different sizes were found along the wall of the sunken part of the house. Undoubtedly, they were arranged there on purpose and probably stored products. 5 jars were found flattened at the bottom of pit. Between them laid animal bones in anatomical order, probably deposited as meat cut. The pit is shallow and the vessels have reached almost to its opening. For this reason, its function as a repository remain uncertain. Their capacity, only large jars and a storage jar, support the idea. However, there is no explanation for the lack of attempt to reach and extract the preserved products, for after such an action, the bones would have hardly remained in anatomical order. Two types of lids were used at the settlement. The first one with a conical body ending with a knob, flat base and handle. The second with a conical body and a cylindrical sleeve. The first used to cover the opening, while the second is used inserted into it. Here we name these cover lids and insertion lids. Cover lids predominate. The comparison of the diameters of jars, rims, and bases of the cover lids shows that the latter can cover mouths with a diameter of 40 to 95 millimeters, the smallest lid, to 110, 180 millimeters, the largest lid. This means that the lids can cover all jars in the first three groups, very small, small, and medium jars. Without the largest lid, the rest will cover 6, and together with it 14 out of total of 19 large jars and not a single storage jar. The insertion lids are more suitable for closing vessels with a high cylindrical mouth. They can provide a tighter closure, even sealing, by using natural adhesives. Their dimensions show that they are used to cover openings with a diameter 90 to 120 millimeters and are suitable for the large amphora-shaped vessels. One of the restored insertion lids has a smaller diameter and is for closing a smaller jug. Closed vessels vary in shape and capacity. For convenience, here we name them all jugs. Storage jugs, or amphora, have a capacity of more than 6,000 milliliters, always have two handles, and are obviously used for storage. They have an elongated body with the handles protruding from the mouth, or more globular body with two handles on its shoulders. Medium-sized jugs are presented of 3 vessels of different shape with 1 or 2 handles. Jugs of small and very small sizes make up most of the closed shapes. Their use as tableware is beyond doubt, and usually they have decoration. We can assume that the smallest of them were used for liquid spices. The rest are suitable for water, milk, wine, and other liquids. All bowls have a capacity of up to 2000 milliliters. Only 3 are very small, up to 250 milliliters, and will move to the cups group. 2 have a capacity of 2000 milliliters, and the remaining 10 are small bowls with a capacity between 400 and 850 milliliters, and 26 are medium with capacity of 950 to 1710 milliliters. The capacity of the bowls shows that most are used to serve products for more than one individual, probably meals for the whole family or special fast dishes. Small bowls are rather individual or contain some quantity of specific products. Only 3 cups have a specific shape. They have a capacity of up to 200 milliliters. The rest are in the shape of small jars, 9 pieces, and in the shape of bowls, 3 pieces. The cups are the least represented shape, and with the exception of 2, are found in structures from the last chronological phase of the settlement during the 12th century. Probably the need for small ceramic cups appears later in time. Vessels represented by a single specimen were also found, are distinguished by shaped storage jar, a pitus, a lamp. The jar has a capacity of 14,000 milliliters, which corresponds to other storage containers in the shape of jar or amphora. The pitus has a capacity of 162 liters. A second one was found partially preserved without the mouth. The 2 pitus were probably extracted from an ancient site in the vicinity in order to be reused as repositories in the medieval settlement. The lamp, which stand is missing, has a small bowl blackened on the inside with a capacity of 155 milliliters. According to their capacity, the vessels from Zlatna Livada can be distributed as follows. Tableware, that includes very small jars, small to medium jugs, bowls, and cups. Cookingware includes medium and big jars, cover lids, and storageware that includes storage jars and amphorae, pitus, insertion lids. And one piece is to that group of technical ware, the lamp. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Romiana, for your interesting presentation. Is there any questions? Any comments maybe for the presentation? No. No. So without further ado, we move on to the poster presentations.
Vesna,
Yes.
sorry, this is Platon speaking. I receive a message from Sofia. I'm afraid she wanted to send to everybody but as I was asking the question, the last question, she sent it to me.
All right.
Would Sophia repeat her question, please?
Yes, of course.
Sorry, I did not want to make disturbance here. I just wrote it directly to him that I read somewhere that the shapes of these vessels and polishing could prevent rodents getting into the storage vessels, but I don't know if it's true or not. So it was not a very important question. But thank you for the comment. Sorry, I'm out.
So.
Nisam je razumela, postavila pitanje.
Yes. Rumiana?
Yeah.
I believe the question is for you.
I'm sorry, but I didn't hear it very well. Would you please repeat the question?
Zsófia, please ask your question again.
Yeah, sorry, I did not ask the question. I just made a comment to my own presentation for Platon in the chat, but I did not want to disturb this presentation. I'm sorry.
There is nothing to answer.
Oh.
Okay, thank you.
Well, the connection was not perfect, so I'm sorry. I make confusion with this. Thank you all. So can we move on to the poster presentations then? I believe yes. Dear colleagues, you have 5 minutes each, and after all 3 posters, there will be time for I believe a short discussion, because we have to take care to leave enough time to join the keynote lecture, which starts at 5. We begin with Marie-Philippe and crossing manufacturing and use alteration traces on vessels, contribution to a functional typology analysis at the dawn of the Iron Age. Marie, please join us with your presentation.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, sorry. Yes. 3 years ago, 2 pits have been discovered in Ittenheim in eastern France. They are about 20 meters apart. These pits have been created to extract some earth and then used to throw away pottery sherds dated back to the early Iron Age. A settlement should be very close, but it has been destroyed. These 2 pits contained 250 kilograms of sherds, that is more than 1,700 vessels. As I'm a specialist of technology, I constructed the typology linking shape, dimensions, and technology of the vessels. I thus classed the sherds into 13 groups. I realized very soon that some use alteration traces occurred regularly and that they were related to the types of the vessels. Small globular pots and pots with cord are restricted forms. Firing coloration is heterogeneous. No, it's not better, sorry. Yes, the firing coloration is heterogeneous on the outer surface, and there are carbonized residues on at least 5 vessels. Moreover, at least 14 vessels show a horizontal coloration limit on the inner side. The limit is a black glossy strip which occur on the upper body or on the rim. I thus suppose that these pots have been used to cook some food in a liquid. The lower red coloration would thus be the original color of the pot, preserved from the smoke of the fire by the liquid. The glossy strip would appear where floating organic matter burns on the hot clay. Pots with cord, which have a large orifice and a rough clay, correspond to what is usually supposed to be a cooking pot, which is not really the case for the small globular pots. On the right, pots with a long flared rim have large dimensions, fine clay, beautiful decoration, often made with slips colored with iron oxide and graphite. On 20 containers, the inner surface of the body is fallen, sometimes entirely missing. It can be a result of fermentation. An organic residue analysis made on a quite similar vessel from Vix revealed possible fermentation of beer. Fine bowls and basins have a thin wall and fine clay. They are thus very light. Surfaces are burnished or polished, often decorated with a slip made with graphite. The lip is often abraded at least 28 times. 7 vessels have also vertical striation on the outer surface, where the diameter is the highest. These types were thus often handled to drink or to collect things, maybe inside another container. The striation could also result of transport, washing, and storage. In the middle, platters with flared rim are very large and thick, and thus very heavy. The inner surface is magnificently decorated, slipped with iron oxides and graphites, whereas the outer surface is only smooth. There is no regular use alteration traces. It seems that platters were not frequently handled. Maybe they have been placed on a support to display dry food, for example. At the bottom, rolled basins are coarse, unrestricted vessels of varied dimensions. There are no regular use alteration traces, but at least 43% of them have one notch, which can be used to pour a liquid. During the Middle Ages, some basins with a notch like this were used to skim the milk in order to collect the cream. And last but not least, 5 containers are lime filters. This kind of vessel has been well recognized in late Iron Age settlements. It was probably used to filter whitewash, a liquid made with lime. There is always a white cover on the inner surface. Shapes are varied. It can be a pot with holes, like here, on the bottom, or another shape which has been recycled by perforating the bottom after firing. These few examples show the links between several facets of ceramics. There are still a lot of questions. For example, specific storage vessels are missing. But this is a small step in the understanding of pottery production and function linked to dietary behaviors. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marie. Now I call Sergio Taranto with the presentation Technological and Functional Traces on Pottery Husking Trace Research. Sergio, please join us with your presentation.
Hello to everyone. I prepared just a short PowerPoint. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Sergio Taranto, and I am a PhD candidate at the Autonomous University of Barcelona in joint research with Sapienza University of Rome. I would like just to briefly provide an overview of my doctoral research, now in its last phase. The research focuses on the production sequence and function of a pottery shape called a skin tray. The term refers to plates used by late Neolithic communities of the entire Near East, and these are very large and thick vessels, almost always made of coarse plant-tempered clay, and present a very peculiar feature. The internal surface is crossed by impressions, incisions, or grooves, according to a wide variety of patterns. Such future has always aroused curiosity in scholars. Since the beginning, it was thought that the scores were not just a decoration, rather than they were strictly related to the function of the trace. Scholars attempted to explain it on the basis of analogies with similar ethnographic vessels. In particular, they suggested that the asking trays could have been used, as their name suggests, for asking cereals, to process a kind of cheese called kurut, or even for baking bread. My research began from an experimental approach. Asking trays replicas were reproduced according to different shaping techniques, surface treatments, and score patterns carried out by using several tools. The replicas were used for asking cereals, processing the kurut, or baking bread according to different variables. In particular, baking trials were performed according to several cooking techniques, fire installations, types of flour, etc. Experimental activity revealed that the asking trays were particularly suitable for baking a solid dough in a domed oven. In fact, in this case, their shape with large base and low sides is adapted for cooking in an oven. Their thickness allows to retain the heat, and above all, their internal scores working as anti-adhesive arrangements facilitate the removal of the bread from the vessel. In a second step, the topic was investigated throughout microscopic analysis. Both technological and functional traces were analyzed. The analysis involved the creation of an experimental reference collection in order to link specific actions with the traces from which they are produced. The experimental reference collection created during the first step was widened, and the focused experiments taking into account more specific variables were added. The technological and functional traces developed on the pottery surface during the activities were analytically and systematically observed and described throughout naked eye, stereoscopic, metallographic, and digital microscopes. Finally, the experimental traces were compared to those one present on Askintei fragments from several Near Eastern archaeological sites, giving new insight about the production sequence and actual use of these basins. In conclusion, the analysis revealed that the useware on archaeological fragments are comparable to those one present on experimental replicas used for baking bread. A look was also turned to ethnographic comparisons with other trays used for baking bread, like those one from Balkans, of which other speakers will talk about in this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. After we heard all three presentations, I'm opening the discussion. Yushin. Oh, yes, sorry. The third poster presentation is co-authored work of Marcin Šeliga, Katarzyna Švačko, Marek Stankiewicz, and Katarzyna Gawriolik-Šeliga. Between the technology, form and function, some archaeochemical reflections on the using of Neolithic LBK tableware in the Upper Vistula Basin. Marcin Šeliga will be presented. Please, Marcin.
Good afternoon to everyone, and greetings from snowy and frosty Poland. Okay. Sorry. Everything is all right? Okay. Linear band pottery culture. Yes, may I? Okay, linear bank pottery culture was the first of the early agricultural communities that came to the northern foreland of the Carpathian Basin from the areas of southwestern Slovakia, crossing the Moravian Gate, and then spreading along the river valleys of the Vistula and Odra rivers and their tributaries. LBK represents the western branch of the so-called linear cycle that covered in its maximum extent the vast area of Central and Western Europe, as number one. In the light of the current state of research, first communities of this culture appeared in the upper Vistula Basin no earlier than approximately 5,400, 5,300 BC. One of the most characteristic features of the LBK pottery is the clear distinction between the so-called table and kitchen vessels. They differ in the methods of their production and technological properties, as well as in the diversities of their forms and types of used ornaments. These differences are clear in the classic, especially in the classic music note, so-called music note, and late so-called Żelazowce phase of the LBK development. Table pottery associated with the LBK is generally thin-walled, having good technological parameters and carefully shaped external surfaces, which are usually adorned with various composition of incised ornaments. Although these vessels are not typologically diversified, mainly cups and slightly less frequently bowls, their sizes and capacity are highly varied. These features allow us to suspect various possibilities of their use and their actual purposes. This assumption became the fundamental basis for initiating interdisciplinary research on the functional use of tin-walled vessel in the Upper Vistula Basin in the early Neolithic. Here we would like to present only the preliminary results of the lipid residue analysis performed on the set of ceramic finds from the Elbekite settlement in Tominy in southern Poland, using gas chromatographic and mass spectrometric method, GCMS. Which is one of the most commonly analytical methods using to identify organic compounds within the archaeological postshells. Site 6 in Tominy is situated within the southeastern part of the Ilja foothills, about 1 kilometer northeast from the edge of the lost cover of the Sandomierz upland. And the excavation of sites carried out between 2006 and 2017 led to discovery of rich relics of diverse human activity undertaken by multicultural communities from the Middle Paleolithic up to modern times. Phase of the most intensive settlement on this site was related with the early Neolithic. Previous systematic excavation led to discovery of several dozens of LBK features, including relics among houses. Among the LBK remaining findings from Tominy, the most numerous category were definitely ceramic materials, represented by a very large collection of vascular ceramics, over 10,000 fragments. They were generally characterized by a poor state of preservation and a very high degree of fragmentation. The whole collection was dominated, circa 70%, by non-ornamented fragments originating from various parts of vessel's bodies. A predominantly part of the ceramic inventory is represented by fragments of tin-walled vessels, mainly cups, decorated and on external surfaces by various compositions of incised lines, supplemented with diagnostic ornamental motifs, that is music note and Żelazowce notches. Lipid analysis were based on the established protocol described in detail in the many publications. The ceramic samples were cleaned with a modeling drill to remove the exogenous lipids. Then the shards were ground to a powder in the mortar and transferred to a glass soft-clad apparatus and subjected to continuous solvent extraction. The lipids of free fatty acid were readily extracted from the ceramic spot shards matrix using organic solvents, while the free fatty acids were raised from the post shards and then esterified by extraction with strong base solvent extraction. The fatty acid methyl esters were identified based on their mass spectra and related retention time, which were searched against the NIST 08 mass spectra library, and also by comparing their retention time and mass spectra to FAME standard mix, SAPID from Supelco. The results of GCMS analysis clearly indicate the presence of animal fats in the tested samples. The most total lipids extract were dominated by palmitic acid and stearic acid. The relatively high abundance of stearic acid to palmitic acid suggests that these lipids were derived from animal fats. In the sample were observed also low abundance of unsaturated fatty acids, mainly cis-9 octadecanoic acid, typical for fresh animal fats, and presence of dodecanoic and tetradecanoic acid, typical for plant seed fats. The phthalates were present in most samples, but often at very low levels. These are usually the results of storing samples in plastic bags. Some of the samples were also rich in alcohol and alkyl derivatives, which may indicate the presence in these vessels plant residues. We also analyzed animal fats previously subjected to high temperature treatment derived from duck, pig, and cow. We compared the obtained FAME profile with the FAME extract of sample number 24. The results again confirmed the use of animal fats in these cooking pots. It was most likely beard fat. So, in conclusion, GCMS was a useful method for analysis of absorbed lipid residues on archaeological ceramics. This fatty acid can be easily identified by their conversion to methyl esters. The ceramics vessel T32 contained a fatty residues which shows features of ruminant animal fat. In the tested samples, we also found biomarkers for vegetable fats, plant material, and fatty residues with no distinguishing feature. There is no relationship was found between the form of size of the vessels and the use for the preparation of only animal or plant foods. Both types of residues most often coexist within the individual samples. The results of the conducted analysis allowed to assume the medium and large sized from several to over 20 centimeters in height thin-walled globular crabs of LBK were used primarily for the cooking of food. Preparation, that's mean cooking of food, consisting of both plant and animal ingredients. In addition to fatty acid residuals, this is confirmed by quite frequent traces of soot on the outer surfaces, and as well as carbon deposits in the inner surfaces of individual samples of vessels. The presented results are preliminary, of course, but correspond very well with the analogous data on thin-walled spherical cups known from other LBK sites in the northern part of the Carpathian. Further GCMS analysis of LBK ceramics from Tomini will be continued. So thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for the extension.
Thank you, Marcin. After we heard the three short presentations, I'm opening discussion on this part of the session. First, do we have any questions for Marie-Philippe? And maybe for Sergio Taranto? Any questions for Marcin, Katarzyna, Marek, and the other Katarzyna? So thank you all this evening participants, and see you again just before 5.